My boyfriend slapped me and I responded calmly. The slap cracked across my face and I smiled. Austin froze, his hand still raised, confusion replacing the rage in his eyes. "What the fuck are you smiling about?" he demanded. I reached behind me and grabbed my phone from where I'd propped it against the coffee maker, the red recording light still blinking. "I'm smiling because you just assaulted me on camera. The video uploaded to my lawyer 30 seconds ago." His face went white. "You set me up." I nodded, still smiling. "Your ex-girlfriend warned me 3 months ago. Said you did the same thing to her. Started with shoving, escalated to hitting, always made her think it was her fault. She told me you'd do it to me too, just a matter of time. So I've been documenting everything since then, waiting for you to show your true colors." Austin's hands started shaking. He looked at the phone, then at me, then at the door like he was calculating whether he could run. "This is entrapment. You provoked me. You kept pushing and pushing until I snapped." I laughed, cold and sharp. "That's not how entrapment works. I said your mother was overbearing. That's an opinion, not a crime. You responded with violence. That's assault. The law is very clear about which one of us is the criminal here." I walked past him to the bedroom, my heart pounding despite my calm exterior. My suitcases were already packed, hidden in the closet since yesterday. I'd been ready to leave for weeks, just needed the final piece of evidence that would make sure he couldn't twist this into some mutual conflict story. He followed me, his voice rising to a shout. "You can't just leave. We can talk about this. I'll get help, I'll go to therapy, whatever you want. Just delete that video." I pulled my suitcases out and set them by the door, then turned to face him. "Your ex said you'd promise therapy too. She said you went to 3 sessions, told the therapist I was the problem, then quit. She said you cried and begged and swore you'd change, then hit her again 2 weeks later. I'm not interested in reruns of her story." Austin's face crumpled, tears starting to fall. "Please, I love you. I made a mistake. One mistake shouldn't ruin everything." I zipped my last bag closed. It wasn't one mistake. It was 8 months of emotional abuse leading up to physical violence. The slap was just the finale. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, Claudia Ramos. "Video received. Clear evidence. Filing restraining order now. Police notified." I showed Austin the message and watched him read it, his tears turning to panic. "Police? You're having me arrested?" I shook my head. "Not arrested. Not yet. The restraining order means you stay 100 yards away from me at all times. If you violate it, then you get arrested. If you contact me, arrested. If you show up at my work, arrested. You have 72 hours to move out of this apartment. The lease is in my name, which you'd know if you ever paid attention to anything that wasn't about you." I grabbed my suitcases and headed for the door. Austin moved to block me, and I held up my phone, still recording. "Go ahead. Give me another assault charge on video. My lawyer would love that." He stepped aside, his face a mask of disbelief and rage fighting for dominance. "You're a psycho. You planned this whole thing. You manipulated me into hitting you just so you could play victim." I stopped at the door and looked back at him. "I didn't manipulate you into anything. I gave you the same situation hundreds of couples experience every day. A disagreement about family. Normal people talk it out. Abusers hit. You chose violence because that's who you are. I just made sure there was proof this time." I walked out and heard him punch the wall behind me, the sound of his knuckles hitting drywall followed by a scream of pain. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove to Simone's apartment, where I'd been secretly storing my important documents and valuables for the past month. Simone opened her door and pulled me into a hug before I could say anything. "Did you get it?" she asked. I nodded against her shoulder, finally letting the calm facade crack. My hands started shaking, the adrenaline that had kept me steady during the confrontation now flooding my system with nowhere to go. He hit me exactly like Rebecca said he would. Same pattern, same escalation, same excuses. Simone guided me inside to her couch where Rebecca was already waiting, her face pale with concern. Rebecca was Austin's ex-girlfriend, the woman who'd reached out to me 3 months ago after seeing my picture on Austin's social media. She'd sent me a long, detailed message describing her 18-month relationship with Austin, how it had started perfect and gradually decayed into a nightmare of control and violence. I'd almost deleted Rebecca's message, almost blocked her as some crazy ex trying to cause problems. But something in the specific details she described made me pause. The way Austin would go silent for days as punishment for minor infractions. The way he tracked my location constantly and interrogated me about any deviation from my routine. The way he criticized my appearance, my friends, my career choices, always framing it as helpful advice. Rebecca had described all of it with eerie accuracy, incidents I'd never shared publicly. That's when I knew she was telling the truth. I'd met her for coffee the next day and listened to her story, watching her pull up old photos of bruises, old text messages where Austin apologized and promised to change, old medical records from an emergency room visit after he'd shoved her into a table. I stayed for 18 months, Rebecca told me that first day, her coffee cup shaking in her hands. I kept thinking it would get better. He'd be sweet for weeks, then something would set him off and he'd hurt me, then apologize, then be sweet again. The cycle repeated until I didn't know which version was real anymore. She'd looked at me with eyes that held both sympathy and warning. "You're at month 5 based on his posts. That means you're about 3 months away from the first physical incident. That's his pattern. 5 months to establish control, 3 months to test boundaries, then the violence starts. If you're smart, you'll leave now. If you're like I was, you'll stay and wait for proof. But if you wait for proof, make sure you document everything. Because when you finally try to leave, he'll convince everyone you're lying. I'd chosen to wait for proof, but I'd done it strategically. I'd started keeping a journal, documenting every incident of emotional abuse with dates and details. I'd backed up my text conversations with Austin to cloud storage daily. I told my brother everything, given him copies of my evidence, made sure someone outside the situation knew the truth. I'd researched domestic violence laws and learned that emotional abuse left no marks, no evidence, nothing a court would take seriously. I needed something concrete, so I'd stayed, playing the role of devoted girlfriend while secretly building my case and waiting for Austin to escalate. It had been the hardest 3 months of my life, walking the tightrope between protecting myself and provoking him just enough to reveal his true nature on camera. Simone brought me tea and sat beside me while Rebecca reviewed the video I'd recorded. "This is perfect," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's clear. It's time-stamped. It shows him hitting you after a verbal disagreement. No jury would side with him on this." I took a shaky sip of tea, the hot liquid burning my throat but grounding me in the moment. "He said I manipulated him, that I provoked him on purpose." Rebecca nodded slowly. "He'll say that to everyone. He told people I was crazy, that I attacked him first, that he was just defending himself. His friends believed him because he's charming and I was an emotional wreck by the end. But you're not a wreck. You're calm, prepared, strategic. That makes all the difference." She paused, her eyes meeting mine. "Thank you for believing me. Most people didn't." The next week passed in a blur of legal proceedings and practical arrangements. Claudia filed the restraining order and it was granted within 48 hours based on the video evidence. Austin had to remove his belongings from our apartment under police supervision, a process I watched via the building's security cameras from Simone's place. He'd taken his clothes, his gaming equipment, some furniture, leaving the space half empty, but finally peaceful. My landlord changed the locks at my request, adding a deadbolt and a chain for extra security. I'd filed a police report documenting the assault, though the detective warned me that actually prosecuting would be difficult unless Austin violated the restraining order. "We can charge him, but without prior convictions or serious injury, he'll likely get probation and anger management classes," the detective explained. "The restraining order is your best protection right now." I returned to work at the marketing firm where I'd been employed for 3 years, telling my boss, Natasha, a condensed version of events. She'd noticed my distraction over the past months, the way I'd flinch when my phone buzzed, the weight I'd lost, the dark circles under my eyes. "Take whatever time you need," Natasha said immediately. "And if he shows up here, we call security and police. I'll make sure everyone on our floor knows not to let him in." The support was overwhelming and unexpected. I'd spent so long hiding the truth, convinced people would judge me for staying with Austin, that the immediate belief in protection caught me off guard. My coworkers brought me coffee and asked if I needed anything, their kindness a stark contrast to the isolation I'd felt living with Austin's criticism and control. But the peace didn't last long. 4 days after I'd left, my phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. I answered the first one and heard Austin's voice, slightly distorted. "You can't just destroy my life like this. I lost my apartment, my friends are asking questions, my family thinks I'm a monster. You need to drop the restraining order and tell people the truth, that we had a mutual fight that got out of hand." I hung up immediately and called Claudia. She contacted the police, who traced the number to a burner phone. Austin had violated the restraining order by contacting me, which meant he could now be arrested. The police went to his new address, a friend's couch based on the forwarding address he'd given, and issued a warning. One more violation, and he'd be taken into custody. The harassment intensified. Austin couldn't contact me directly, so he started contacting my friends, my family, even my coworkers. He'd send them long messages explaining how I'd manipulated him, trapped him, deliberately provoked him into hitting me so I could play victim. Some people believed him, or at least questioned my version of events. My aunt called to ask if maybe I was overreacting, if maybe couples therapy would help. My college friend posted something vague on social media about how there are 2 sides to every story. Each betrayal stung, but Rebecca had warned me about this too. "Abusers are excellent at playing victim," she'd said. "They'll turn your support system against you if they can. That's why documentation is so important. Let them talk. You have video evidence. Reality wins eventually." Austin's friends were the worst. They showed up at my apartment building, not close enough to violate the restraining order, but near enough to be threatening. They'd stand across the street and stare at my windows, sometimes filming me if I looked out. One of them, a guy named Dylan, who'd been at our place for game nights, started a social media campaign painting me as a vindictive ex who'd faked abuse allegations. He posted screenshots of old text messages between Austin and me, taken out of context to make me look unstable or aggressive. One text where I'd jokingly said, "I'll kill you," after Austin had pranked me by hiding my keys, was presented as evidence of my violent tendencies. Another text where I'd said I was frustrated with him during an argument was framed as proof I was emotionally abusive too. Claudia sent cease and desist letters to Dylan and the others, threatening legal action for harassment and defamation. Most of them backed off, but Dylan doubled down. He created a website called The Truth About Mira Hayes, where he posted a manifesto written by Austin describing me as a calculating manipulator who targeted him for financial gain and sympathy. The manifesto was 12 pages of twisted half-truths and outright lies, painting Austin as a victim of my elaborate scheme. It claimed I'd researched his relationship with Rebecca, then deliberately mimicked her complaints to make my story more believable. It suggested I'd provoked him systematically over months, studying his triggers and exploiting them. It even implied I'd edited the video to remove footage of me hitting him first. I read the manifesto once, sitting at Simone's kitchen table with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Every paragraph was a distortion of reality so extreme it would have been funny if it wasn't also terrifying. Austin had convinced himself his own narrative was true, had twisted our entire relationship into a conspiracy theory where I was the villain. Rebecca read it too and just shook her head. He wrote almost the exact same thing about me, word for word in some places. He even used the same arguments, that I'd researched his ex before me, that I'd deliberately provoked him, that I'd edited evidence. It's like he's working from a script. She looked at me with tired eyes. The thing about abusers is they truly believe they're the victims. They have to, or they'd have to face what they really are. Claudia filed a lawsuit against Dylan for defamation and harassment, using the manifesto as evidence. This crosses the line from opinion into actionable falsehood, she explained. He's making specific factual claims about you that are demonstrably false. We can prove you didn't edit the video through metadata. We can prove you didn't target Austin for money because you make more than he does. We can dismantle his conspiracy theory piece by piece. The lawsuit seemed to wake Austin up to the seriousness of the situation. 2 days after being served with papers, he showed up at my workplace, walking right past security and into the elevator. He got to my floor before anyone stopped him, appearing in the doorway of my office with wild eyes and desperate energy. "We need to talk," he said, ignoring Natasha, who was immediately on the phone with security. 5 minutes. That's all I need to explain. I stood up from my desk, my heart racing but my voice calm. "You're violating a restraining order. Security is coming. Leave now, or you'll be arrested." Austin took a step into my office and I picked up my phone, opening the camera app and hitting record. "I'm documenting this. You have 10 seconds to leave before I have video evidence of you violating a court order and trespassing." Security arrived before Austin could respond. 2 large men in uniform who positioned themselves on either side of him. "Sir, you need to leave immediately. Police have been called." Austin looked at me with something like hatred mixed with longing, a toxic combination that made my skin crawl. "This isn't over, Mira. You can't just erase what we had." The police arrived within minutes and arrested Austin for violating the restraining order. He was held overnight and appeared before a judge the next morning. Claudia attended the hearing and called me afterward with an update. Judge wasn't pleased. Austin's been given a choice: 30 days in jail or enrollment in a certified domestic violence intervention program with electronic monitoring. He chose the program. He'll wear an ankle monitor for 6 months that alerts authorities if he comes within 500 yards of you. He also has to complete 100 hours of community service and attend weekly therapy specifically for abusers. I felt relief wash over me, though I knew this wasn't truly over. 6 months of monitoring was something, but after that he'd be free to move wherever he wanted. Still, it bought time. Time for him to hopefully get help, or time for me to plan my next move if he didn't. Life slowly returned to a version of normal. I moved to a new apartment across town, somewhere Austin didn't know about. Only Simone, Rebecca, my brother, and Claudia had the address. I changed my phone number, deleted all social media accounts, made myself as invisible as possible online. Work became my refuge, diving into campaigns and projects that required my full attention. Natasha promoted me to senior strategist, partly as recognition of my work, and partly to give me more flexible hours so I could attend therapy appointments. I'd started seeing a counselor who specialized in domestic violence survivors, working through the trauma and the guilt that came with it. The guilt was the hardest part, knowing I'd stayed longer than I should have, that I'd deliberately provoked Austin in the end, that maybe if I'd just left quietly, this all could have been avoided. My therapist, Dr. Yolanda Price, addressed that guilt directly. "You documented abuse so you could protect yourself and potentially other women in the future. That's not manipulation. That's survival. Women who leave abusive relationships without proof are often dragged through custody battles, divorce proceedings, or civil suits where they're painted as liars. You ensured that wouldn't happen to you. You took control of your own narrative." Her words helped, but the nightmares persisted. I'd wake up thinking I heard Austin outside my door, or I'd freeze when I saw someone with his build and hair color on the street. Hypervigilance became my default state, constantly scanning for threats, always having an exit strategy, never fully relaxing even in safe spaces. 5 months into Austin's monitoring program, Rebecca called with unexpected news. 2 more women have come forward. They dated Austin before me and experienced the same pattern. They saw the news coverage about his arrest and decided to report their experiences to police. My hands went numb holding the phone. "How many women has he done this to?" Rebecca's voice was grim. "At least 4 that we know of now, spanning 7 years. The pattern is identical for all of us. 5 months of charm, 3 months of escalating control, then violence. He targets women who are professionally successful, but socially isolated, women who've recently moved to new cities or gone through difficult transitions, women who might not have strong support systems to help them leave. The realization made me sick. Austin was a predator who'd refined his technique over years, learning from each relationship what worked to trap his victims. Claudia organized a meeting with all 4 of Austin's known victims. We met at her office on a Saturday morning, 5 women sitting around a conference table sharing stories that were frighteningly similar. There was Jasmine, who'd dated Austin 7 years ago when they were both in college. There was Nicole, who'd been with him for 2 years and left after he'd broken her arm during an argument. There was Rebecca, whose story I already knew. And then me. We compared notes, finding patterns we couldn't have seen individually. Austin used the same compliments, the same love-bombing tactics, the same gradual isolation techniques. He'd even taken us all to the same restaurant for our first date, ordered the same wine, told the same stories about his childhood. It was like he was running a program, inputting different women, but following the same code. "We need to make sure he can't do this again," Nicole said, her voice fierce despite the tremor in her hands. She was a corporate lawyer who'd almost lost her career due to the injuries and trauma Austin had inflicted. The 6-month monitoring isn't enough. We need his pattern documented in the court system, so when he inevitably hurts someone else, there's a record. Claudia nodded slowly. With 4 separate victims making consistent allegations, we have grounds for a more serious case. I can file a motion to extend the restraining orders and push for longer-term monitoring. I can also work with the DA to potentially upgrade charges from simple assault to a pattern of abuse. It's difficult to prove, but with all your documentation and testimonies, we might have a shot. We spent the next 3 months building that case. Each woman provided their documentation: photos, medical records, text messages, journal entries, police reports. The evidence was overwhelming. Austin had left a trail of broken women across 7 years, each one believing they were alone in their experience. Each one convinced they'd somehow caused or deserved his violence. Seeing our stories laid out together created an undeniable pattern that even the most skeptical observer couldn't dismiss. The DA agreed to prosecute Austin for multiple counts of assault and stalking, charges that carried significantly more weight than the single incident I'd captured on video. The trial was scheduled for 8 months out, giving us time to prepare and giving Austin time to realize how completely his world was about to collapse. Austin's lawyer tried negotiating a plea deal, admission of guilt on lesser charges in exchange for avoiding trial. We rejected it unanimously. We wanted a public trial, wanted his pattern exposed in court, wanted a verdict that would follow him forever. Claudia warned us it would be brutal, that Austin's defense would try to discredit each of us, paint us as vindictive exes conspiring together. They'll argue you found each other and fabricated a narrative. They'll suggest Rebecca coordinated this whole thing because she's bitter about their breakup. They'll claim Mira deliberately provoked Austin while knowing Rebecca's story. Expect them to attack your credibility, your mental health, your motivations? It won't be easy. We looked at each other around that conference table and nodded. We'd all survived Austin. We could survive his lawyer, too. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Austin's defense attorney, a sharp woman named Gretchen Voss, did exactly what Claudia predicted. She painted me as a manipulator who'd weaponized Rebecca's story, suggesting I'd manufactured evidence and deliberately provoked Austin into hitting me. She brought in a video forensics expert who testified that while my video hadn't been edited, the camera angle was suspiciously perfect, implying I'd staged the entire incident. She questioned why I'd stayed in the relationship if Austin was truly abusive, suggesting my continued presence proved I wasn't actually afraid. She pointed out that I made more money than Austin, had more education, more professional success. How could someone so capable be controlled by a man with less power? But Gretchen couldn't explain away the pattern. 4 women, spanning 7 years, with identical stories and independent documentation. She couldn't explain the medical records from Nicole's broken arm or the photos of Jasmine's black eye. She couldn't explain the text messages where Austin apologized for losing control and promised to never hurt you again. She especially couldn't explain the recordings from Austin's court-mandated therapy sessions, which his own therapist had to turn over during discovery. In those sessions, Austin had admitted to hitting all of us, framing it as justified response to our provocations, but nonetheless confirming the violence occurred. His therapist's notes described Austin as having narcissistic tendencies with difficulty accepting responsibility, and concerning patterns of blaming partners for his emotional dysregulation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with a verdict, I sat between Rebecca and Simone, gripping their hands so tightly my knuckles ached. Guilty on all counts. 3 counts of assault, 2 counts of stalking, 1 count of violating a restraining order. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, reminding Austin he remained out on bail, but any violations would result in immediate incarceration. Austin's face was blank as he was led from the courtroom. No emotion visible, like he'd shut down completely. His mother sobbed in the gallery behind him, shooting accusatory glances at us like we were responsible for her son's choices. I felt no sympathy. She'd raised a man who hurt women, and she'd probably made excuses for him his entire life. Sentencing day arrived with gray skies and cold rain. Judge Raymond Torres presided, a man in his 60s known for taking domestic violence cases seriously. He'd reviewed all the evidence, all the victim impact statements we'd submitted, all the psychological evaluations of Austin. When it was time to announce the sentence, Judge Torres looked directly at Austin and spoke with measured anger. Mr. Brennan, you have demonstrated a clear pattern of targeting vulnerable women, gaining their trust, then systematically abusing them physically and emotionally. You've shown no genuine remorse, only self-pity and blame toward your victims. This court finds your behavior predatory and calculated. You are sentenced to 5 years in state prison on the assault charges, to run consecutively with 2 years for stalking. Upon release, you will register as an offender and maintain a GPS monitor for 10 years. You are prohibited from dating applications and required to disclose your conviction history to any romantic partners. Violation of any of these terms will result in additional incarceration. 7 years. Austin would be 41 when he was released, and his life would never be the same. The 4 of us walked out of that courtroom together, stepping into the rain that felt cleansing despite the cold. News cameras were waiting. The case had attracted media attention as an example of systematic abuse by a repeat offender. We'd agreed beforehand to make a statement. Nicole stepped forward as our spokesperson. Today's verdict represents justice not just for us, but for every woman who's been told she's overreacting, who's been called crazy or vindictive for leaving an abusive partner. We documented our experiences because we knew we wouldn't be believed otherwise. We stayed calm when provoked because we knew emotion would be used against us. We built cases instead of just escaping because we wanted to protect future victims. This is what it takes to hold abusers accountable in a system that still questions women's credibility. We hope our example helps others find the courage to document, to report, to fight back. The aftermath brought unexpected connections. Other women reached out, sharing their own stories of dating Austin or men like him, thanking us for validating their experiences. A domestic violence organization asked us to speak at their annual fundraiser about the importance of documenting abuse. A true crime podcast wanted to feature our case as an example of how abusers operate in patterns. We said yes to everything, channeling our trauma into advocacy and education. Rebecca and I became close friends, bonding over the shared experience and our determination to prevent Austin from ever hurting anyone again. Simone joked that we'd formed a support group, but it was true. We were supporting each other through the aftermath of loving someone who'd turned love into a weapon. A year after Austin went to prison, I received a letter from him. It had been screened by authorities and forwarded to Claudia, who asked if I wanted to read it. I almost said no, but curiosity won. The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten, surprisingly coherent. Austin wrote about his time in prison, the mandatory therapy he was receiving, the things he was learning about trauma and anger and control. He wrote about his own childhood, abuse he'd experienced from his father, patterns he'd unconsciously replicated. He didn't excuse his behavior, but he tried to explain it, tried to trace the line from hurt child to violent adult. And at the end, he wrote something that made my hands shake. You were right to document everything. You were right not to trust my promises to change. I wouldn't have changed without consequences, and I might not change even with them. But you gave me a chance by forcing accountability. Thank you for that, even though I hate you for it. I never responded to the letter. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in court, but I kept it, filed away with all the other documentation of our relationship. Evidence of a cycle broken, a pattern interrupted, a small victory in a larger war against violence that wouldn't end with Austin's imprisonment. Because there were other Austins out there, other men who learned that charm could become control, that love could become possession, that violence could be hidden behind apologies and promises. And there would be other women who'd have to make the choice I'd made, to stay and document, to provoke and record, to smile calmly while their world cracked apart, all for the evidence needed to prove they weren't crazy, weren't lying, weren't the problem. 3 years later, I stood in front of a college auditorium full of young women, teaching a course on recognizing red flags in relationships. I showed them Austin's early texts, the ones that seemed romantic but contained seeds of control. I taught them about love bombing and gaslighting and isolation tactics. And I told them about the smile, about staying calm in crisis, about documentation and evidence, and the sad reality that women often aren't believed without proof. One student raised her hand and asked if I regretted provoking Austin that final time. I smiled, not the calm smile from the kitchen, but a genuine smile earned through survival and advocacy. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.